The other day.
Hi everybody, we'll just one more minute just to see who else is in, and then we'll get going.
That's good. There's 22 people on. That's not bad.
It's not bad. It's pretty good. Maybe we'll just kick off. It looks like we're fairly static there. Kia ora everyone. I'm just looking at the names. Some of you may not know who I am. So introducing myself, Gareth from Community Energy Network, one of the 3 networks involved in the Hui. And the other speaker today is Bill Heaps, who is on the board of CEN and knows considerably more about the energy sector than I do. So we're just going to tag team the first sort of 10-15 minutes, and then really keen to get questions and conversation going with everybody. So we'll keep an eye on the chat if you want to ask a question on there, but also feel free to put your hand up, and we'll get a conversation going. Just really quickly, just scene setting in terms of what this this Zoom is, and in terms of the Strengthening Communities Hui, the first of 5 of these this week. This is going to have a big play. These conversations are going to kick off basically what we're going to be doing on the Tuesday, so the joint networks day of the Hui. Somewhere buried in these names is Liana Banana. There she is. So Liana Banana is our MC for the Hui, and she's going to be writing some notes on the conversation that we had today. There she is. So she's going to be there in the background pretty much on each of these sessions for this week, and pulling together some work that the joint boards are going to look at on a Sunday meeting before the Hui, and then we're all going to look at on the Tuesday of the Hui down in Dunedin. So that's why we're recording, just to make sure that we catch everything that's mentioned. Sound okay? Has there anybody got any questions around where we're up to? All good. All right, I will share my screen. So this isn't going to be a hardcore talk fest, I hope. Can you all see that? You've all disappeared off my screen, so I'm hoping you're there.
It's not showing up yet, Gareth.
It's working on it though.
My whole computer's just frozen. That's cool.
Yeah, we've just got a whirring screen. Maybe shut it and start it again. The screen sharing.
Okay.
I'll stop you screen sharing.
Yeah, that'd be great. I might have to leave and come back.
Yeah, you could try that. Otherwise, you could also email me the PowerPoint and I'll click through for you.
Okay.
Sorry, always some technical difficulties. Yeah, I'll jump back on in a sec.
Maybe, Izzy, in the meantime, we could ask if there's any questions that anyone has about the rest of the Zooms this week or the Hui, and we can either try and answer them now or get answers. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to yell out. The other thing that I would ask everyone to do is to have a look at your travel. We know that Air New Zealand has changed a few flights for some of our participants and haven't always sent notifications. So just check those travel times.
Hey, I'm back. See if I can start this up again. Does that come up now?
There you go.
Right. Okay. All right. So we're now eventually here to talk about distributed energy. So I thought we'll just sort of do a bit of a 101 real quickly about what distributed energy is, and then go into a little bit of what that could mean for us. So hopefully this is going to work. I'm just going to leave it like that in terms of trying to make it full screen. So hopefully this works. You guys can all see the Transpower page now?
Yeah.
So just to give you guys a bit of a run through about how the energy sector works, how the infrastructure is set up in New Zealand. This is what we'd call the main trunk line. Basically, this is what Transpower runs. Transpower is wholly owned by the government. These are the big lines. If you drive down the desert road and you see those massive power lines that are rolling up beside the road, that's what this is. So the blue dots there are the big generation spots, and they're hydro, wind, geothermal, gas or coal typically. The red dots there are the main load, main demand areas. You'll notice, so the gas and coal there in the North Island, those are what we call the peakers. So when we have a lot of electricity demand coming on, it's typically in the morning and the evening. Those generation infrastructure kick in and provide the extra electricity that we need during those high demand times. The hydro especially, but also the geothermal, are what we call the base load. They just keep chugging away every day, provided there's water in the dams. So in the electricity sector, we call that the transmission infrastructure, the big cables and systems that are set up to do that. The next level down is kind of overseen by this group, the Electricity Networks Aotearoa, and they're typically called either lines companies or electricity distribution networks. And they kind of, they look a bit like a regional council or a district council borders. These guys are taking, the wires are getting smaller now, so they've taken them off that Transpower grid and they've gone into a substation or something like that, and they're coming out and the wires are a bit smaller. Your typical poles and wires that you see in town, that's that grid we're talking about now. So we've gone from transmission, which is the big stuff, down to distribution, and that's your local supplier. When you look at your bill, there'll be a Transpower line and then there'll be a distribution line, and that's your local network. They make decisions about how your electricity grid is set up. So it'll determine where industry goes in your town and where housing development can go in your town as well. I think from memory, there's 27 of these organizations, and they've all got, there's probably 3 or 4 different ways of organizing them. I think the majority is still a trust. And for those of you who live in a network area that has a trust, you'll vote in the trustees at the same time that you vote your council members in. But some of these organisations, like in Wellington and just very recently on the East Coast, now foreign-owned organisations. They still need to comply with the code. There's a code in the electricity sector that everyone needs to comply with. So most people won't notice the difference, but it's less democratic in terms of how they make their decisions.
And where the profits go.
And where the profits go. Thanks, Bill. That whole system I've just showed you typically uses, this is the model that's been in place for at least the last 100 years. You sort of generate, you put it in a big transmission grid, goes down to a substation, and then it goes into those smaller lines, which then go to a factory, commercial, or to you guys in your homes. And it's a one-way system, kind of a bit like recycling, and our typical consumer model follows a similar sort of model for electricity. That's what typically has been the case, and that's how our sector, the electricity sector, has been set up and run. And so I guess the phase we're in now, the transition phase we're in right now, is that all of that's changing. And so the energy sector is similar to, I guess, fast-moving consumer goods and a whole bunch of other sectors, in being challenged quite seriously right now about how they establish new systems and new technology and new ways of doing that meet all of our respective needs. So just keep that in mind. It's got that one-way flow typically, and that whole infrastructure, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure has been put in place for this system, this one-way flow of electricity. Now introducing distributed energy, and this is by no means unique to New Zealand. In fact, we're probably lagging behind many of our benchmark countries, like Australia and UK and Europe and the US and Canada and what have you. This is what distributed energy essentially is, and we'll probably stop on this slide a little bit, and most of the rest of this discussion is going to be on this slide, basically. The key element here that, and we're going to dive into this a little bit right now in a bit more detail, but the key element here is that it's become incredibly more complex already for those distributors, those 27 distributors. They're now having to cope with a much more complex environment in terms of how to manage the electricity in their regions because of what's going on. Well, another term, it's another language almost for the electricity sector. It's called grid edge. So if you think of the transmission lines as being the trunk of the tree, and the distribution guys are the branches that come off that tree, grid edge is like right at the edge of those branches, where the leaves are and that sort of thing. That's where a lot of us live and breathe and do our work. For example, I'm involved in a project out at Raglan, so with extreme zero waste. That's right at the grid edge. It's got the skinniest wires, and it's also got the least resilience. If we get a storm or we get some other gnarly weather event, that's typically where the grid falls over first, is on those grid edge locations, because even a car could drive through a pole and that community's electricity is out until they've fixed it. If you go back to Gabriel and what have you, some of the communities in the far north and on the east coast were cut off for a long time because there were multiple failures in the grid, and they couldn't even get to where the failures were for a while. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. Just going back to that one there, you notice that there's a yawning gap on the west coast and up on the east coast, up on the far north. And the far north and east coast is where those storms were, and that's where we don't have very good infrastructure, and that's where we had a lot of energy outages for a long time. And guess where the most expensive electricity is? It's up in the far north and the east coast, for that very reason, because the big infrastructure's a long way away. And so those communities are on the grid edge, and it's expensive to manage that infrastructure. And it's even harder to talk about what we're going to talk about now with distributed energy, and all these opportunities that are here. But all of them challenge the status quo in terms of how the sector organises itself to go through the transition that we're already started. So, Bill, I thought maybe, did you want to sort of run through some of these?
Yeah, I think that was a really good introduction, Gareth. The way that I like to think about it, what you talked about, is really like, the food supply chains, where you've got big producers, the big farms and the big producers, and then they sell through to the wholesalers, and then they go to the supermarkets, and then the dairy owners go to the supermarkets and buy from them, and then we buy those in the community. And it's always been that one-way flow where the foods come from. And then people can grow their own food at home and in their own communities. But what happens with electricity, which is quite different, is you could sell that produce back. We can't do that with the supermarkets, but you could sell that produce in a way quite easily back into the system. Imagine if you could do that with food, and you reverse the flow of where the food chain, the food supply chain coming through. And really that's what's happened, and it's why it's such a revolution that we sort of always, for the last few decades, we'd had this concept of people being able to generate solar power from the roofs, even hydrogen fuel cells sitting in houses and creating heat, fresh water, and electricity, just from hydrogen, all of these sort of things. And it's really only in the last 10 years that all of that has accelerated. You think that electric vehicles, using lead acid batteries. I think I drove the first electric vehicle in about 1985 around Manchester, and it was a big transit van, full of lead acid batteries in there, and it just wasn't going to happen. But now with lithium-ion batteries and EVs coming in, there's been a huge technology change really over the last 10 years. And now we've got vehicles that not only can get the fuel out of the electricity system, but they've got a battery there. So if there's a shortage of electricity, they can actually supply back into the system. So you can have this sort of two-way sort of flow and transition just because of the electric vehicle technology. And we know that that's the range of vehicles and the charge that they hold and those sort of things, and the technology around it are starting to grow quite quickly. So you've got a little power station sitting in your house, this storage that you can use to supply the grid, supply your own needs, to supply your grid if there's a shortage anywhere else in the system or a constraint in the system. And the same sort of thing has been happening in solar power on houses. So you can combine the solar power with battery, and the efficiency of photovoltaics, again, over the last 10 years, has absolutely come on in leaps and bounds, become more efficient, more available, and subsequently the cost has fallen. So now that's why we can see that there is more and more solar power going on. And as Gareth said, in other parts of the world, it's accelerated far more quickly. You'll see that if you go over to Australia, and where almost every house now, when you look at in Sydney and Victoria and South Australia and Queensland, all the houses have got PVs on them, and that's primarily because of a good government subsidy. But they removed the subsidy when that had kicked in, so the price of photovoltaic, they established the market. It was sort of seed funding to establish the market for PVs, and now it's a fully established market and doesn't need subsidizing. over here, it's we don't have those subsidies, but the PVs now we can piggyback on the developments, and now they've got short paybacks when you put PV on your house. I think they're getting around 5 to 7 year paybacks. So after 5 years, you're basically getting free electricity. The same thing's happening in industry as well, because industry is having to move to become more sustainable, move off fossil fuels. And there's a whole set of new technologies moving in there. We're talking about electro.
Yeah, I think it's like tiles and that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just keep
Is that okay?
put a spash of it. Great palm. Yeah, we'll keep it.
We'll just get Sam Gray if you can mute.
Sorry.
That's all right. I thought I had an echo going on there. And what this diagram shows is there's so much going on. It isn't just about PVs and batteries. It's about how you connect those. And there's demand response. So smart grids where electrical equipment and electrical appliances will talk to each other and talk to the center, and they can offer when there's big constraints on the system, or when there are constraints on the system, if we've lost a generator or something like that happens. And then to avoid problems, to avoid power cuts and shortages, these appliances can switch off, or the demand can interface with that. So there's a whole lot of things going on in there. So it's nothing short of revolutionary. It's a big revolution for the electricity industry. And as Gareth said, the big problem is that we've built all of all the utilities, and all the system is built for one-way energy flow from the power stations to the users. And now we've suddenly got this reverse where it can flow both ways. So what we need to make that work are systems. We need systems, physical systems to manage the physical flows of energy, but sitting over the top of that are the financial transactions and financial flows. So that's what I was going to talk about a little bit. This diagram showing really how the physical flows could work, and the second one then gives you a bit of an overview. I didn't, don't dive deep. No, go back to the first one.
That one there.
That one. Yeah.
I didn't want to overwhelm people too much with that.
No, don't dive too deep into that one. This was a concept that I did for a DER and community energy hub in Martinborough and in the Wairarapa quite a few years ago, about what they'd have to do to manage those financial flows and all the transactions. So the energy, you were importing energy into your hub, and then you're exporting it. So what happens there? Because you've got those physical flows to manage, which is really the DER manager, and then you've got the financial management over the top. So you're buying and selling into and out of the major electricity market, and then across the different participants in the hub. Who gets paid what, and who pays what, and how do you line all of those up? So these are the sort of systems now that are starting to be developed to support DER and to support community energy hubs. And the other aspect is, when we're thinking about this in the community energy network, and if you're looking at this as an opportunity, I think it's very important to remember that whilst we want everything to be environmentally sustainable, I think that community energy hubs are going to have to be financially sustainable. So there will need to be community energy enterprises. We'll have to make it work. And this is another diagram that I did a few years ago to try to understand how we could fund one of these. So you get kickstart funding coming in, and then as you operate the hub, you create a surplus. So you don't sort of just give everybody cheap prices in there and give them the low cost. You build up a sustainable savings fund in there. So you build up some capital in there. And through making that sustainable, you will be able to borrow. You'll get finance. You might still need some support from government, but you'll be able to get finance to fund future energy hubs or growing your energy hub or those sort of things. So I think we've definitely got to think about that, how we make them self-sustainable and self-funding, and not always reliant on going cap in hand to government, or or wanting to have philanthropic support coming in. think we've really got to consider them as an enterprise that makes them sustainable, a community enterprise, not a shareholder enterprise, if you get what I mean.
And I think perhaps one of the key messages today for this presentation, and maybe for the Tuesday of the Hui as well, is that we fully recognise. When we CEN started this journey about 5 years ago to learn about all of this stuff, we were quite naive about the complexity and some of the hurdles within the sector. Like we've got 2 of those local networks and now members of CEN, but there's still plenty of network owners out there who are quite resistant to what's going on. And so from our point of view, just sort of now talking to people like yourself who haven't gone through that journey necessarily yet, we understand that there's a bit of a, you can't just jump into what those last 2 slides we just showed straight away. It takes a little bit of time to understand how the sector works, how your particular network wants to operate. There are some very open ones that want to partner with people like us. So there are definitely opportunities to build into that work quite quickly. But by and large, we're probably at the point where we need people to, a lot of people just need to be able to understand their own bills. They need to understand how their energy bills are put together. And then they need to understand what putting solar on their roof, what's the payback, what's the financial model for that? Should we be putting batteries in? How does that work? If we do put batteries in, what sort of batteries should we be using? We're trialing out at Whangaroa an EV battery stack, second-hand EV battery stack. There's a number of elements in there as well around lithium, rare earth materials. Is that a genuine transition project or not? And there's another discussion there around what does energy look like in 30 years' time when fossil fuels are no longer being used, or a vast minority of the energy sourse.
Leon has asked a couple of good questions on the comments, Gareth.
So I stop sharing and then we can get into the conversation.
Oh, you take my questions away now. I was just looking at them on here. Where's he gone?
So what are we proposing the networks to do? Yeah, so I think in this first year or 2, what we're proposing from a CEN perspective is that if people want to engage in an energy conversation from whether it's climate change or local resilience, it's to start the journey. Put solar panels on your roof if you can, or on some land. Have a conversation with your local council. A lot of councils are starting to look at spare land that they've got that they don't have a use for. We could put a solar farm on those, and they're looking for community organisations that could partner with them to do that. There's a very good example if you want to see what it could look like. Energize Otaki. They're not a member of CEN. I need to line them up, but they've got a small solar farm. I mean, it's 140 kilowatts, something like that. So 10 times the size of a residential one. They've got that on a wastewater treatment plant at Otaki, and all it's doing is powering the pumps in the plant. That's it. So they've got to deal with the council for the return. They just get an income straight from the council. There's no other. It's the least complicated community energy project you could probably come up with. So I think if there's interest from your organisations, then CEN would love to work with you in terms of developing a project that is manageable, and trying to sort of take all that complication out of it. There's a lot of unnecessary complication in the energy sector. There's a lot of tech push in the energy sector, and there's not a lot of understanding of what it takes to work with communities. So we've got a very strong role there to play. And I think what we should be looking for is start simple. If you're interested, start simple. You're not going to be able to become fully self-sufficient off the grid in the first 2 years, or even the first 5 years, I would say. Start with an easily digestible project and see how we go, basically. There will be councils that are really into this, and there will be networks that are really into this. And there are philanthropic organizations out there that are very interested in this as well. From our perspective, we are focused on vulnerable communities, but that's not necessarily where we need to go with community energy. We can bring in other communities as well that have got a real mix.
Yeah, I think, Gareth, it's worth mentioning that along with Iraqi, we've been helping to develop guidelines. So a set of guidelines, how you would put one of these community energy groups together. I've been doing a bit of research overseas, and in the UK, as quite a few people have had. The USA is driving these along as well, and they all start off with, well, as a community, how do you come together? Who pulls them together? And it really needs a group in there that, just a group of people that want to make it work. And so that's one thing that you need. You just need that somebody in the community, a group there that will actually drive this through and identify where they are. And we think that our networks are that group of people, the groups of people to do that. So there's already some guidelines around how you bring that together and how you turn it into reality. Along with guidelines, what you need are resources. So you're going to need help to do it. Electricity is an extremely complicated market. It is very complicated physically. It's engineering based and all that sort of stuff. It's very complicated financially, how the transactions are made and how you make that work. So you really need to be guided through each one of those stages on who can help you. Basically, what are the resources that are there to help you? So that's something else that we're putting together. And we're hoping to get some funding to put together to create some hubs to do that, to provide those resources. But what you always need, I knew as a consultant, when you try to get consultancies to work together, everybody wants to partner with each other, to grow bigger and to do partner-owned jobs. But it's no good talking about it. You've got to do it. So, you have to have a project. You have to have a project to make these things work. So I think Gareth's right there, that what we need is, if you can identify, think small, think bigger. There's quite a few projects coming through now, particularly around Marai and Maori communities, that we're getting quite a few of those coming through. There are some examples, like at Otaki and around, that community energy groups have taken off. So it's really starting, if we can help you to get an understanding of what you can look for and what the possibilities are, and then you look at your own communities and see who you could get together and who'd be enthusiastic, then we can start to help you by applying the resources and getting the structure around it.
There's a good question here for me, and ideal number of members of the community. There probably is an ideal one. We haven't hit it yet. But just for example, the community energy whaingaroa, that's been essentially umbrellaed by Extreme Zero Waste out there. So we had the financial manager and GM with our support, with a bit of CEN support. We probably had, I would say, and a few community members as well. We had about 5 or 6 people in the core group that were driving that. And I guess maybe a slightly unusual community in that, there's quite a lot of people out there. I hope you don't take that badly, Sarah. But a slightly unusual community in that they're super engaged already in these sort of conversations, and I'll acknowledge Extreme's role there in the last 20-25 years, kind of seeding that environment, if you like, to allow for that conversation to grow. So 5 or 6 people engaged people will work in that situation. I know that there's others like Chris Olsen in New Zealand that's working hard on the cooperative model. So that would need more people to be involved at the start. Yeah, you would need to have a room with sort of 20 or 30 people in the room, I would imagine, to get something going in that environment. I think we're sort of relying on all you guys who have already done the work and built the trust in your communities and the networks within your own communities to build a conversation, basically. So I don't think you need a huge number of people at the start. You just need a core group, 4 or 5 people that are committed, and you're going to build the network and find your supporters, whether it's the distribution organization or the philanthropy or someone like that, that'll give you the energy you need to make more energy.
Gareth, in terms of the once you do get the ball rolling, in terms of the actual number of households or I suppose participants in the network, I mean, is there kind of a maximum size after which it starts to get kind of unwieldy and more like a corporate model, or is there a minimum viable size? Or
I'd
is
love
that
to be able to answer that question. We haven't hit that scale yet, anyway, that I'm aware of. I think we are definitely using an enterprise model here, though. There's no way of fudging that. It has to be. There's quite a bit of discipline required to the systems that you use. Just to be able to play in the energy sector game, you need to be reasonably sharp with how you set the system up. There are a couple of retailers, electricity retailers around that are interested in, well, might be more than a couple now, that want to support these sort of projects. So there's a concept called peer-to-peer trading. So the electricity that you generate in the community is sold to the community. That's an accounting system, basically. It's not a physical one. The electrons disappear into the grid. But the systems are in the process of being developed right now. Some of them are quite mature, others are taking a little while to get going, and there is pushback in some elements of that system. But they can get quite big in overseas and what have you. Well into the hundreds, if not thousands, of participants per community, and that's okay.
Yeah,
as long as you've got a good system.
I think really the size of it depends on what your objectives are. So what do you want to do in the community? Do you want to it's not just about trading energy, but it could well be, let's say in a remote community where, one of the big things is the children leave and leave the community. So the community shrinks because there's no employment for them. There's nothing like that. A community energy scheme, if it was your objective, could actually provide employment within that community for your own people in that community. It could interact and interface with the agriculture in the community, so you could get greenhouses that are producing things, producing food that need some heat sometimes, and sometimes they've got to they have to release heat as well to cool them down. So that can actually produce energy. There could be farms nearby that have got lakes and that, got dams for the water on the farms. You might be able to put a little pumped hydro scheme in. So, it could go right across different communities, and it just depends what the objectives are, I think, for the community energy. The ones that we've sort of seen, like I mentioned, Martinborough. So you imagine a reasonably small town there, but then you've got all the vineyards, you've got this, that, and the other, all interacting to create a local energy environment that then trades with the market, in the greater Wairarapa and the greater country. So I think it does depend on your aspirations and what natural resources you've got and how those sort of things could come together. At the moment, I don't think there is a limit. You wouldn't want one. Could it be a community energy network if the whole United States was one community energy network? The difference there would be if it's in the United States, it would be all for profit. So the difference here is, well, It's about sustaining community energy that produces, sustainability, but it's also producing this deep value for the community. It's sustaining your community, which isn't the normal capitalist model. And it's not a straightforward sort of, it's a community model, which may put some limitations on it. I think looking at some of the ones that are formed that I looked at in England, one of the big things is the number of people that you can sustain in the organization without it falling to pieces, because you've got to get people agreeing and those sort of things. And generally in community organizations, the bigger you go, the bigger the arguments and the potential for falling out and all of that stuff is. So it's got to be people with that one vision. It's got to be people that are enthusiastic, and it's got to be people that are able to work together. And so I think it'll be more the human element that limits the size of community networks rather than anything technical.
I see your hand up, Paul. I'll just answer a couple of the written down ones quickly. Community wind, there is definitely opportunity for community wind. It did get smacked pretty hard, again, through some lack of leadership, I think, political leadership, to allow for it.
Yeah.
So we had Scott Willis and Blueskin there got spanked pretty hard with that one. So I think there is, well, we'll see what happens with the new government, but there is a national policy statement, I think, being nearly finished on that. But community wind's definitely got a stake in this for sure, and offshore too. Are schools interested? I love the ideas of schools. I think they're a great opportunity for us. We already have a lot of those networks in place. We have those connections already through other conversations that we're all involved in, and they make great locations, both from a civil defence point of view, potentially, but also from an engagement point of view. We do a lot of education work, and we're supporting Toimata and Enviro schools and others. There's a huge opportunity there, I think, for the kids to provide some of that energy engagement work into our communities. A school could become its own retailer, so it could sell electricity to the parents, and that's another way of engaging. School's not working in the weekends, and it's not working over summer, so it'll have a lot of excess electricity being generated off a solar system. So and it's passive income for the school. And if it's anything like my local school that's 100 metres away, it's still got a coal-fired burner chugging away. There's still some need there to sort that sort of stuff out.
There's a lot of opportunities.
I'm ignoring George's one because that sounds like work for me, that a template for the process. But no, in all seriousness, yes, we would have a typical process for setting this sort of stuff up, and just for everybody to understand, a typical process is probably a process that none of you will go through, but we can, it'll be close. And I did put a link to the Araake Community Energy Guide if you want to have a browse through that. That'll give you a good grounding as well. Paul, did you have anything else to say, or is that school? Were you going to comment about schools too?
Yeah, I was going to comment about that school one, Gareth. Yeah, but you answered everything there within that question anyway. Fantastically. See, schools can also harvest during the weeks that they're closed, so they can be harvesting. They'll still harvest that energy, and that energy then can be shared out into the community. And normally they're directly in the community where potentially energy is needed, and it can be directed straight to the community in need, or whatever it might be. But also, like Gareth says, they can actually be civil defence hubs as well. Most schools, can share that energy out, or they can still generate energy and enough energy to. A lot of schools have showers, toilet facilities. So if there's an emergency, the community can actually go to the school, and they've still got electricity. That they can still provide warm showers, cooking, etc., things like that. And not only that, it's they're also a great vehicle for education as well. I guess, Belay, we're kind of working on something at the moment. Hopefully that can come into fruition. But schools become an education component too, about community energy, and they can educate whānau, wider whānau, and the wider community as well. So yeah.
I'd be interested to see what other people think about this, but there's a there's a piece that we don't often talk about in this. I'm sure it's the same for other sectors. Around degrowth, and what does a transition actually look like? What are we going to be? How are we going to be operating in 30 or 40 years' time? For example, a typical solar array, the inverter will need to be replaced after 12 years, and the solar panels are probably needing to be replaced after 25 years-ish. On the coast, maybe a bit less, and off the coast, maybe a bit longer. So as we get rid of our fossil fuels, and there's a big push to electrify industry as well, we're replacing the fossil fuels with renewables, and that's kind of, we have to do that. But there's a massive overhang coming up, in my view. Where we're talking about replacing, but also growing the electricity demand as we grow the economy, at the same time as trying to keep a renewable system up and running and functional and meeting our needs. So I think there's what we've presented today is not perfect by a long shot. We are going to be relying on new technology over this next 30 years. The storage systems need to change. The current lithium ones clearly won't meet our needs in the future as we ramp up, but they are a transition to doing that. My key point here is that there's a conversation in every community over the next 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever it is, about how we do this. And if there is a degrowth element to this, that's a fascinating conversation. And we're going to need leaders in our communities to manage that conversation. So if you're up for it, becoming experts, or at least knowledgeable about the energy sector, to support your communities to navigate their way through what might be some pretty churny conversations, and how we manage potentially degrowth, but how do we manage being way more efficient with our energy than we are at the moment. So that's probably a bigger conversation for maybe over a beer or two, but I think in terms of the purpose of this Zoom and the purpose of our conversation on the Tuesday, we're wanting to streamline, take the learnings that we've learnt the last 5 years and streamline projects throughout the 3 networks, and start simple but ramp up over time. That's kind of the goal. That's what we're pitching. Are there any more questions or thoughts from anybody? Or last thoughts from you, Bill?
No, I've not really got anything more to add. I think it's covered a broad range.
Yeah. I think I just leave it. Maybe we'll leave it there. We'll say, yes, it's complicated, it's hard, but it's worth it. And it's one of those areas that, it's right up there with housing and food and transport. It overlaps considerably, and it'll overlap with whatever enterprise we want to be running in the next sort of 30, 40 years. We're going to have to be good at this. All good. I think we'll leave it there. And thanks everyone for attending. And we will see you all hopefully tomorrow. What are we talking about? Container recycling systems tomorrow, I think. Is that right, Say? Yep. So come for that. I think a very interesting conversation in terms of how it might overlap with this one as well, in terms of across the networks, not just owned by one particular network, but across all the others as well. All good. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.